me. There's actually a nice poster downstairs, the history of blockchain, which starts in 2009, and everything before 2009 is ancient history. So I'm ancient history. I did my PhD on this in 2001. We wrote wonderful protocols that essentially do exactly what protocols like Tendermint do now. We even had formal proof. We implemented everything. It was called Sintra. IBM went out and tried to put it somewhere, and nobody cared. So I spent 1 year after my PhD to still work on this, and then decided I work on something people actually want, and left the field. And then it came back to me when suddenly, first I was working for electricity companies, and people came and said, a blockchain replaces your secure end devices. You don't need to do anything else anymore. You need to do blockchain. So I figured, I know what these things do. They don't replace secure end devices. So I spent about half a year just talking people out of using blockchain where it doesn't fit. And then started getting more constructive. Worked with a couple of startups, Chainspace, which was swallowed by Facebook, which is a slightly bigger startup, and now with Vega to get into the derivatives market. And I'll start a little bit with the theoretical background, which actually goes even further back than 1998. Why is the problem we're solving actually hard? Because a lot of people say, oh, I have the blockchain, I have the implementation, and then I do all fun marketing above, and they don't understand the stuff we are doing below is actually really, really difficult. So what it is from a scientific view, we used to call it a Byzantine fault-tolerant total ordering protocol, which probably explains why nobody ever wanted it. Also atomic broadcast, virtual synchrony, that is around since 1978, I think. Cornell had a project called ESIS, which you cannot find on the internet anymore, because if you Google ESIS, you get other results. And that was the first protocol that actually built a distributed state machine. Back then, they could only tolerate crash failures, but it was already essentially what we're trying to do now. And then later, we moved it into the Byzantine settings, so we can't only tolerate if people crash, we can tolerate if they get active early evil. And it's good for a lot of things, digital currencies, obviously. If I have an agreement between all the parties who has how much money, then I can build a currency. Generally distributed state machines, all kinds of things will need to be synchronized over the internet. People also try to use a blockchain as a distributed database, which is great if you sell blockchains, but it's total overkill because you spend a lot of energy and agreement on that make sure that everybody knows exactly what happened in what order, and if you run a database, you normally don't need that. And the core of this is called Byzantine agreement. So if you have solved this problem, then you can build a blockchain relatively easy. So Byzantine agreement term was coined by Leslie Lamport. I have a bunch of generals that don't trust each other. They want to attack a city, but the attack is only successful if all the honest generals attack at the same time. So they need to agree, do we attack or do we not attack? It was originally called Albanian agreement, with the argument Albania is so small, if I piss them off, then nothing bad happens to me. And then he decided to play it even safer and piss people off that are long dead. And now we have a bunch of very, very annoying impossibility results, and all of them actually should have learned in kindergarten already. Our first impossibility result, life isn't fair. So what we want for a derivatives market, we want fairness, as in if I tell all the validator, or if all the validators see that I'm trying to sell IBM before they see Rebecca trying to sell IBM, then my order to sell IBM should arrive before Rebecca's. Unfortunately, we can show this isn't even possible. So we can prove this strong notion of fairness. Everybody sees me doing something before Rebecca leads to actually that happening before her action happens. That we can prove isn't possible. So that's a bit frustrating. I'll come later on how we can work around that. The second one is that the evil guys don't need a majority, so 1/3 evil guys is enough, and that's the best we can do. And my boss back then said, why only a third, can't you do better? It's mathematics. I don't care about mathematics, I care about business. So we have another way to sneak around this. And also the assumption is a little bit shaky because usually everybody uses the same implementation or you're in the same legislation. So even the guy who coined the term Byzantine said actually, I meant arbitrary failure and not coordinated evil because it's ridiculous to think that a coordinated evil guy can only attack a third of the parties. So we actually also later found a way around this. If you look at existing things, it's partially we live in an illusion that we are safer. Like if you look at Bitcoin, there was this beautiful religious Twitter war on how many daughters do I need to kidnap to bring down Bitcoin. And the guy got very, very burned for a statement, but it's actually true, it is exactly 3 daughters, assuming all those people have daughters. And the reason is, if you look at the mining pools, you have 3 big mining pools all located in China, and they together already have 51%. If you're very brave, actually 1 daughter is enough, but kidnapping the daughter of the Chinese president, maybe then you're a braver person. We're taping this, right? Proof of work, we have very big systems, we may have 1 million of users, but in the end we are not as distributed as we think we are. And if you look at Ethereum, which now wants to go to proof of stake, about 100 wallets already have a third of all assets. So even there, yes, we have 1 million users, we are open, everybody can join, but in the end, if 100 people gang up on you, they still dominate the chain. So this is actually good for us because the next impossibility result is that things don't scale. So communication is generally squared in the number of validators. But if even Bitcoin and Ethereum, in the end, the number of validators is practically around 100 validators we can handle. If we need 10,000, then it's getting very, very difficult because n squared communication with 10,000, that's a lot of messages you need to send around. So yeah, reality check, we can't scale up, but everybody who claims to scale up, in reality, they aren't really that scaled up either. Well, and the last one, which is actually the most frustrating thing, I learned this 2 weeks after I started my thesis, the whole problem I wanted to solve actually is impossible. There's a paper from 1985 called the FLP, Fisher-Patterson Impossibility Result. And they showed that in an asynchronous system, no deterministic algorithm can guarantee that it ever terminates. And that's a little bit bad. If we never terminate, we never can guarantee that any transaction ever happens. And they proved even if only 1 guy crashes, then we cannot guarantee termination. So that was it's a pretty bad result. So we gave the authors a big award and afterwards tried to figure out how can we cheat. And that's actually one of the important things to know. Everybody who does a blockchain is cheating somewhere. And the important thing is to figure out where were they cheating so it doesn't bite you. And I compare this a little bit to the tax system, so 2 very, very scary books. It's okay to cheat, but you should really, really know what you're doing. If you don't know the tax system, if you don't know what you do, don't evade taxes because it will end you up in jail. If you don't know exactly how the cryptography works, don't cheat on Byzantine agreement because somebody will hack you. So either understand it or hire someone who does. And it also helps to have a very, very good memory to remember 5 years on where you cheated so it doesn't bite you later, which also applies for crypto and taxes. If you forgot where you stole taxes 5 years ago, the tax office doesn't. Neither does your protocol. One thing, so we said interactive seminar, and we are relatively few people, so please, if you have questions, interrupt me if I'm too fast, too slow, too boring. It's your seminar, so you feel free to steer me to what you want to hear. Okay. So how do we cheat? Proof of work, Bitcoin, that was actually a pretty ingenious thing. So the way Bitcoin cheats around this result is it never terminates. No Bitcoin transaction by the protocol logic is ever final. In theory, if I come with a longer chain than Bitcoin has, I can undo the very first Bitcoin transaction. In practice, that's hard, so I don't have the computation to do this. But this is how they cheated. This is also how they cheated around the 1/3, that we just don't terminate, which is fine for what they're doing. The problem for us is we run a derivative market and the non-termination actually makes it very, very slow. Because you need to wait for the chain to grow for a very long time until you're halfway sure, and I have some bad slides later what happened. Voting-based, also then called Byzantine fault tolerance. The point there is the impossibility proof holds for asynchronous algorithms. So if I don't have any timing assumption, I can't do an agreement. So in voting-based protocols, we essentially say, or in BFT protocols, we essentially say, well, I have no idea how to model time on the internet, so we still don't have any idea how to model time, but I do it anyhow. So I throw in some timing assumption, then I'm not asynchronous anymore, and then I can solve agreement. There's also the sort of related approach that some protocols do, which is the calm-on approach, which is no adversary has that level of timing control that it can derail my protocol. Again, I don't know how the internet works, but you need a lot of control, and if the NSA wants to hack me, I'm toast anyhow. I'm not entirely sure with 5G, we may actually have adversaries that can do it. It's not a really bad argument, but if you try to make a strict proof on the protocol works, it's walking a very fine line. And what I did, which obviously I like most, is randomization, that we say, well, I cannot terminate deterministically, but I can terminate with probability 1. It's good enough because probability 1 is essentially guaranteed it does happen. It's a little bit slower than the timing-based protocol, but it's much more robust. So yeah, I don't think I need to explain proof. Do I need to explain proof of work? So yeah.
We'll read about it later.
Okay, yeah, exactly. So read the original paper, it's only 11 years old. But the important point from proof of work is if at any point somebody gives you a longer chain than you've seen, drop everything you have and use this chain. So you never have finality by the protocol logic. And the result is I took this from some more or less random Bitcoin exchange. For every exchange, you actually have to wait a certain number of other blocks to come after your block before you're sure there was no fork and my block is actually doing what it was supposed to do. So for Bitcoin, it's currently 6 confirmation, 1 hour. So again, for us, it's totally unacceptable. Well, and the other thing you see here is that Ether Classic was disabled because there's a guessed wrong. They guessed 120 blocks is fine, and somebody actually did manage to create a fork that was longer than 120 blocks and stole a lot of money. So that's the other thing. It's not protected by the protocol. It's sort of, it's a policy that we just hope it doesn't go wrong, which works mostly, but sometimes it doesn't. Well, and the other price is pay a lot in performance. And if you were on the wrong partition, so my worst case scenario was China reconfigures the big firewall of China. So for a while, we don't talk Bitcoin to China. They have more computing power than we do. So everything we do in Europe will be undone as soon as they open the firewall again. And there, Bitcoin is relatively brutal. It's a sucks to be you principle. If you were on the wrong block, not our problem. So the timing protocols, that's actually, so most of them, they have a leader and then they bounce messages back and forth until I'm pretty sure everybody saw what the leader says and the leader can't lie anymore. And they're usually designed, if the timing assumption is wrong, then just nothing good happens, but also nobody dies. So essentially the worst thing that can happen is that the leader doesn't do his job. And then if we didn't hear from the leader for 5 minutes, we say maybe that wasn't a very good leader, so we elect a new one. This is what most BFT protocols do. The price we pay for this is it's relatively easy to derail the protocol with a very limited denial of service. I just need to figure out who the leader is and shoot down the leader. And then after a while you change, and then I shoot down the next leader, and I can pretty much keep you going forever. Yeah.
Is that very is the difficulty of that contingent on the number of participants within the network? Because if it's a randomized leader, how can you guess who it was enough to shoot down?
That helps, but I usually know who the leader is now, so it also depends. But this is actually one mitigation strategy. So Libra does this, that they say we have a randomized leader, and we hope that we are faster with selecting our leader than the attacker is on redirecting their attack.
Yeah.
So that is a strategy there. So how that works in practice, we actually need to see. But I can still, And I can also run a denial of service on several parties and then slow you down, and then your timing assumption is wrong.
So like the smaller network, I assume that would be easier if you don't have a lot of leaders in the pool to select from. It's easier to attack.
Yeah. The other problem is I can try to attack the leader until the leader is one guy I collaborate with. Mm-hmm. And then fairness is violated because the leader is the guy who orders things. So then I have total control on what is the order and which things happen, which is a bit dangerous there too. But it's a good approach. So it has its disadvantages. But Castro Liskov were the first ones to build this protocol in '99, and it was a very inspiring protocol back then. And I may even try, if I'm not part of the system, to just kill a leader that just made an order I didn't like and then hope that the next leader makes a better one. So I don't even need to be a validator to try to impact the order of events. Now the bad thing is in here we need timing models, and there's a complete zoo of timing models. Nobody knows how to model the internet, so everybody does it their own way. And that makes it very hard to compare protocols. What's mostly used now, what Tendermint uses and also Libra, it's called GST, which is very nice to work with, but has nothing to do with reality. So GST means global stabilization time, and essentially means the internet is Wild West, and then at some point it suddenly starts behaving exactly like it should and never misbehaves again ever. And very nice to build protocols, nothing to do with reality. The implementation is essentially we keep increasing our timeouts and hope that eventually we get them right. This is actually a situation we've been in before in '96 with crash failure protocols, and Chandra and Tuek then sorted this out by finding one assumption that is the weakest possible assumption you can make that then everybody could build on. Unfortunately, that assumption doesn't work in the Byzantine world, and we can actually prove it doesn't, so this is ongoing work. Can we find better timing assumptions that are not as ludicrously unrealistic in GST, and then have meaningful performance proofs in protocols that actually reflect a little bit what the internet does. Well, and the last possibility is randomized protocols. So they are more robust because they don't need any timing, but they're a little bit slower. And they exploit, so in these protocols, we make the adversary commit to some actions before he knows what actually the action would be that stops my protocol. So it's essentially round-based voting, and by the time this vote happens, the adversary needs to do some action to stop me, and only here does he find out what would the right thing have been to stop me. So in every round, I have a probability of 1/2 that the adversary guessed wrong and I terminate. I do a couple of rounds and I win. So this is completely asynchronous with, of course, a little asterisk. We have things like I assume every message eventually arrives, so that means I need to resend lost messages where I have hidden timeouts again. So let's again be careful about your hidden assumptions. The price is we need a good source of randomness, so I need to generate common randomness that is unpredictable, uninfluenceable, and yeah, everybody gets the same. And this was actually one of our big breakthroughs that we found this. So we have a coin crossing protocol that everybody can run together when they need a coin. It's one message and then you get a coin out of it, which is completely random. And that seems to be a little forgotten, so people still claim we can't do distributed randomness, but this exists since now almost 20 years. Anyone still questions, comments? Smiles. Okay, some people are still smiling. That's a good sign. So I leave out the common coin and go to the actual topic. So what are our special things for the derivative markets that we need to do, and how do we do them? So the first thing, and if I say something wrong, then please shout. I learned this all from the people that actually know about trading, as opposed to me. So the core thing is latency. We don't care that much about transactions per second. Of course, we want a lot of transactions per second, but if it takes 10 seconds, then the trader has already gone home and doesn't want the trade to happen anymore. So ideally, we would be in the millisecond area. Unfortunately, there's light speed limits if you want a planet-wide network, so we can't. The best we can probably do is somewhere between 1/2 and 1/3 of a second if you have a planet-wide network. So latency is measured between the time that the trader sends something in to the final order is in and known to everybody. So this is important. Gossip-based protocols like Tendermint, where something may be decided already, but then we slowly gossip it through the network to scale up. That doesn't work. So Tendermint can work, but we need to modify it for that. We rather waste bandwidth than latency. So what Hotstuff and Libra do is they try to save bandwidth, but it slows down latency. So Libra is actually bad for us. So I mentioned what counts as a final schedule. And some traders would actually prefer, rather than being late, I don't want my transaction not to happen. So we need a mechanism that a trader can say, if it took more than 5 seconds and forgot about it, I don't want to sell anymore. We would rather sacrifice scalability than latency within reason. So if the protocol gets much slower and then gains the ability to deal with 10,000 validators, we don't want this. So of course we want to scale up, we want to be open, everybody can join, but if that means we lose so much latency that all the traders run away, then we need to rethink. So our goal is something between 20 to 50 validators is enough, and we actually then put in market mechanisms that yes, everybody can join, but we have a market reason to keep the number of validators small. And we need some flexibility. There's different markets with different requirements. So some markets are really, really keen on fairness. Others say, wow, I don't need fairness that much, so who cares? So we need the protocol to also be somewhat configurable. And our additional requirements, so we want to be able to completely step out, so to at some point release Vega to the wild, and then we're a little bit like a standard group or an open source group. We still provide code, guidance, help with specifications, but ideally, at least we want the ability to completely step out and have nothing to do with the management of the blockchain anymore. And open membership, so I mentioned this, everybody can join. We don't want to be a closed club like Libra, but at the same time nudge people, if you have only half a token, why don't you delegate it? A little bit like stock. If I buy one stock of IBM, then they don't want me to turn up on the stockholders meetings. If everybody did, then the meeting would implode. So that's a little bit what we want to do too. We want serious stakeholders, and if you have one stock, delegate to someone who is serious. And we want clean abstractions of the consensus layers, so we could exchange the consensus layer. We want to allow third-party implementations. And if you ever want formal verification, this is a very painful process, so the cleaner interfaces you have, the better it is there. Now, what we have in attacks, so back then, 20 years ago, all we cared about is this Byzantine attacks, and unfortunately somebody who just goes away also counts as Byzantine, which makes things a bit difficult. But now we have other new attacks that we need to consider. So one is traders that try to game the system, and I heard some talks from people running centralized exchanges on how traders cheat. That they start actually looking at the hardware of the router to figure out which ports they need to connect to have the shortest physical path inside a router, which is slightly insane. So what we need to protect against is denial of service and flooding. So somebody shuts us down by doing a million empty requests. Front running that I mentioned, that I just sneak in front of somebody else, or unfair rushing if the market crashes, that the rich people just sell everything first and the poor people get stuck. So exactly what happened on the Bitcoin crash, that the rich people could just bribe the validators, please put me first, and if you had half a Bitcoin, you probably still have it. And wash trading, didn't do much in there yet, is creating artificial, I actually trade with myself and then look how important the asset is, everybody wants to buy one, and I just trade in a big circle. And then we have game theoretical attacks. A lazy validator is someone who says, oh, I become a validator, but I don't do anything. I run my Raspberry Pi at home, and it occasionally sends a message. So you never contribute, but you are validated, you get money. So make sure they don't get money. Greedy validators, we want some limit on the income of validators, so they try to get around it. And Sybil is actually the hardest to prevent, that somebody pretends to be 10 validators and there's only one person behind it. And And there is things you can do, but in the end it's a lead space attack. So I can pay 10 people to run a validator, and there's nothing you can do on a protocol level to detect that they're all paid by me, unless I pay them in cryptocurrency. And we also have a couple of assets, so we assume validators have resources, or that at least we motivated everybody with their Raspberry Pi to not be a validator, but to rather delegate. We can do pipelining, we can do parallelization, and they have enough bandwidth that if the messages get a little bit bigger, they don't suffer. We can punish traitors and attack the business case, so sometimes for certain attacks that don't cause a lot of damage, it's enough that we say, well, we find out you did it, and then we fine you and keep all your assets. Unfortunately, we sometimes have adversaries that are bad economists, so we still need some protection. And we can have an analysis layer that can analyze how the validators act and then give it to higher level protocols and go into payment. So we also have things that we didn't have before. And all this comes together in a big and glorious architecture. So the word layer is unfortunately somebody looks very skeptical now.
That looks like rubbish, huh?
Well, it is, yeah, it's really cool rubbish.
Stop heckling.
So this is actually trying to separate things into very clean layers, so every layer is independent and can actually be exchanged. So right now, Tendermint does everything up to here, and they themselves said we had a lot of functionality bleeding in that we now need to get out because it's getting too complex. So what we want is have separate layers, so reliable message delivery. All this does is make sure if I send a message, it arrives, and I don't care how that's implemented. The upper layer just says, well, I can do this. Then the gossiping protocol, measurement, this is the actual consensus protocol. Threshold signatures define what thresholds actually mean. So I come back to this later, that we want to get out of this whole T+1 n minus T numerical model. Special as other services like timestamps, creating randomness, commit and reveal for causality. And then a lot of management that we have on top of this, voting protocols where the chain itself can vote about its configuration. So we can vote in and out new members, we can reset parameters. And the goal is, and that's actually surprisingly possible, that you can even have a vote that we replace a protocol. We say we have several consensus protocols, and one is a good weather protocol. It's really, really fast if you're not under attack. But if you're under attack, we switch protocol on the fly to a more robust protocol that is a bit slower, but makes life for the attacker much harder. And if the attacker gets a message and goes home, we switch back to the fast protocol again. Well, it's called protocol agility. The other thing is we just don't know how a protocol behaves in reality. There's so many parameters. If you look at academic literature, there's dozens of people that say, I have the best Byzantine agreement protocol. Because it just shows one setting on, well, suppose that network and that adversary and that delay, and I measure only throughput, and in the best case under that kind of attack. Yeah, I'm best. So yeah, everybody can be best somewhere.
Right? People want to give talks, right?
It's great for publishing papers.
Yeah,
actually, well, that was one professor who then fooled them all and wrote one paper, the next 700 Byzantine agreement protocols, and essentially built a protocol generator that then automatically generates 700 protocols that have all these different properties. But if you actually want to run something, what we essentially want is we want to be adaptable, we want to throw a protocol out, see how it behaves, and if we realize it doesn't go very well, then we can switch on the fly to another protocol. Not we, but the chain can. That also makes it easier for self-governance, so things like the hard forks we've seen in a couple of other blockchains, they don't happen anymore. What we can do if we see it doesn't work, we offer another consensus protocol, and then the chain itself has a vote, do we want to adopt it now? So even we as the programmers cannot force in a hard fork, we can just propose it, but it's then the validators or whoever the stakeholders are that then decide if they want to switch over, and that means there is no fork because they have an agreement on which protocol they use. And I verified this with a couple of protocols that are around, and so far, with one exception, they all work, and that one exception is actually sort of Bitcoin-style protocols, so they allow temporary forks And that's something we don't want anyhow in our system. And similarly, we can replace all the other layers. So in this architecture, it can actually be very nice and flexible. And I'm currently negotiating with Tendermint if they actually want to do this. And I hope they say yes. So fairness, exchange. So how do we stop the traders from cheating? Anyone still awake? Yeah, still. Smile's getting a little bit smaller. So yeah, we had the annoying impossibility result that we just can't do fairness, so we need to work around that, essentially by redefining what we mean is fair. So front running is a validator can see a transaction and acts on this and then gets their transaction in first. So I see someone sells IBM, I sell IBM first. Rushing is that we have the market crash and I bribe people to sell first. So there's a couple of things that are already done. So leaderless protocols, the one we did back then, Honey Badger. There's pre-protocols that can remove leaders, which I show later, which I'm pretty sure existed. I haven't found them in the literature, but it's too trivial for nobody to have done that. Well, we mentioned hard to predict fast-changing leaders. So hot stuff has a different leader for every transaction. They're randomized, so it's harder to be the leader and then set the order. And what Tendermint does in addition is they have a DOS protection that the leaders hide between some guard that tries to make it harder to run a denial of service attack on it. Now for front running, what we can do, we can enforce causality. It's used to be called causal broadcast, now it's called commit and reveal. There are several schemes how I can encrypt a message so that only a quorum of people can decrypt it. So I encrypt it and it takes 10 of you guys to decrypt it again. If you use this, it's relatively easy. I throw in the encrypted message, that one is scheduled. And if I do it right and actually weave the decryption into the protocol flow itself, it doesn't even cost me latency. So by the time the message is scheduled, we know what it was, but we don't learn it before. There's several encryption schemes that can do this. We can even encrypt the source. So if I see that Mark Zuckerberg is selling a lot of stock of some company, I sort of could guess it's Facebook. So we could also say, I see there's a transaction, but I don't see whom. The disadvantage there is it's harder to prevent spam because we neither know what the transaction is nor who did it, so we cannot distinguish, oh, this guy is trying to spam us. But actually, this is a very solvable problem. Special cryptography is known, so there's very little excuse to not do it. Fairness in terms of rushing. So what we can do is we can build a protocol. So I cannot say if everybody saw A before B, then A happens before B. But if I have a clock, I can say if everybody saw A before 10 o'clock and B after 10 o'clock, then A gets scheduled before B. Which is not quite as good, but it gets there. And something that was actually inspired also by a centralized exchange where they had the problem they didn't want people to cheat with this nanosecond thing. So they said, well, we just say this is a block and everybody in this block is executed at the same time. Well, we have blocks already, so that's fine. So all we need to guarantee is if all honest parties saw A before B, then at least A and B are in the same block. And then they're executed at the same time. So the guys who cheat me still get a good price, but at least I don't have a disadvantage of it because they don't get in front of me. So this is two things we can do relatively easy with relatively simple protocols. It's a pre-protocol built into the Byzantine agreement, which is another reason for this layered approach that I can draw this out of the agreement and not have to re-implement all these things if we want to reconfigure the protocol. Spam protection, the idea there, so how do we prevent someone from sending millions of messages? And there we use a proof of work. If I send a message, I need to bind it to an existing block from the near past. If I want to send several transactions bound to the same block, I need to do a proof of work. So every trader, the more messages they want to send in a short period, the more work they need to do. And if you want to really spam me, you can't do this work-wise. Disadvantage is traders with very slow computers may actually not get to trade anymore, but if you have such a slow computer, then you probably shouldn't do derivative trading anyhow. That's then again the sucks to be you approach. Late delivery protection, that is actually very simple. So the problem here was a trader, they say if I'm scheduled 10 blocks after the last block I saw or 10 seconds after the last block, don't worry. And here it's actually, we just need to add this information to the block to say if this block is executed after this time, please ignore. And then we just need to validate every transaction twice. First, when it goes in, is it okay? And then when it got scheduled, is it still okay? So that's actually relatively simple. It's an engineering problem, and then our traders are happy. And the leader deletion pre-protocol, it's also a relatively simple idea. So normally we have one leader that does a leader action and can be killed, but we also can say everybody acts as if they were the leader. And once they have done whatever the leader does, then we toss a random coin to determine who actually the leader was. So every American is president, every American governs for 5 years, and then we toss a coin in which country we live. Doesn't work that well, but here it actually works nicely. It adds a little bit of communication, but that means the attacker has no idea whom to attack. Because everybody is a leader, everybody could be it, and by the time they figure out who the attacker was, who the leader was, it's too late, they did the job already. That's again a relatively simple pre-protocol, and
could you just relaunch the attack over and over and over again until you were the one selected as the leader? Or is that just...
No, because you don't know who the leader is. Everybody acts as if they were the leader. And once they finished the action, then only we determine who actually was the leader, whose result we take in. So if you launch an attack now, it's too late. The leader has done their job.
And I guess on the type of attack, that's assuming that you're attacking the leader, like the denial of service to take the leader out. I guess if as the leader you're trying to schedule some transactions of your own and none of anyone else's, then you can keep trying and every so often you're going to get to do that. But
yeah. Well, you can always try and then hope that you are the leader at some point, but that's true for all leader-based protocols that if I wait long enough, at some point I'm leader and I can do something. But it makes it very unpredictable, so if I want to do something more targeted, then this is getting very sporty, because also here I need to act as if I was the leader, and then it can turn out I wasn't. So if I keep trying to do a bad sale, I just keep throwing it in, and then, damn, it didn't work again. I'm not sure how trading fraud works.
Tracer tracing stuff as well. Like, so if you're doing something that's very, very clearly different to think what everyone is gossiping, for instance, to do a completely different set of transactions, we can see that statistically you're
always voting against or doing
your block composition is nothing like anyone else's, and the protocol could actually say, well, we're going to kick this person out maybe before they even get to be the leader once.
Or every time you vote against everybody else, we decrease the probability that you will be leader.
No,
so the less trusted you are, the less likely it is that you ever get elected.
You can't brute force it, basically. You can't infinitely brute force to become the leader.
No, because you did the job before. You can't retry, you can't rewind, it's just going on. So this is all we have on fairness so far. Then the next big thing is latency minimization. So one of our biggest problems, we want to be in the way sub-second area. So one relatively simple thing is we can merge some things, do it in parallel to the running protocol. So if we have commit and reveal, I can already start doing the next round's commit and reveal while my current round is running. That's relatively trivial. A couple of protocols do this. Hot stuff already has one leader starting before the previous one ended their transaction. Leads to a little bit of mess if you need to kill a leader, but it works. What we had 20 years ago, which was actually going much further, and I still have no idea why people stopped that. So when people think about blockchain, they think about one transaction is hashed after the other. We were back then thinking about numerating transactions, and then I can assign the next 100 numbers at the same time. So we had a big sliding window, and if transaction 50 came in before transaction 30 was done, we would just finish 50. We would know this is now number 50. And with execution, you still wait until everything up to 49 is done. And the nice thing is that means every transaction that is seen by someone, I don't need to wait for anything to end. I can immediately start processing it and have optimal bandwidth utilization. And I'm still a little bit flabbergasted. These protocols did this 20 years ago, and all the modern protocols just do one thing after the other and just waste bandwidth, time, and so on. It's a little bit more complex to recover if something goes wrong, because you may have a lot of transactions that are undefined. But I started looking, can Tendermint, for example, be changed to support this, and there is no structural problem. And the really nice thing, which would then be the new thing, so if I have this, I process 100 transactions in parallel. I can also distribute that on 100 different processors, so I save the processing work. But then I can even go one step further. These processors don't need to be in the same room. They can be spread over the world. So every transaction is done by a processor that's somewhere, and then we can actually start, so that's the first version of flocking, that I ask for every request my closest processor, can you do this? They communicate with their closest processors. So all of the protocol run is done locally, and only the last synchronization step is done worldwide. And that way, if we assume I have 150 milliseconds for worldwide communication, I can have 30 milliseconds for the first 3 rounds and only then 150, so then I'm much, much faster than a normal protocol. Yeah.
What's in the threshold of the acceptable for latency? I think you said it earlier.
Well, there is no acceptable threshold in the thing. So what I asked in the beginning if I can give you the holy blockchain where just Rod himself implements everything you need. They told me 2-3 milliseconds, so that's clearly against the law of physics. Okay. And the other idea of flocking is that we can, again, we assume I have validators that have several computers all over the world. And we just say, for example, we always use the validators that are currently at daytime. So where the validators are is moving around the world together with the traders' working time. And then also at any given time, people are reasonably close together. So that's the only way to get past this physics. We need to make sure people are close together at the same transactions happen. And well, let's not talk about all these details. So yeah, we have several ways how we can configure this. And we can actually coordinate all the flocks through on-chain events or measurements, so there needs to be no active thing. The dangers here is, so one danger is flock mapping, that if at some point the entire flock ends up in China, that may not be a good idea, because then the Chinese government can shut us down, or the US or Russia, which is all very, very big countries. The other sort of related danger is if you always look for geographically close computers, you may end up in the same Amazon cloud. So then suddenly Amazon owns your entire blockchain temporarily, which also is a bad idea. We have a slightly higher attack surface because every node now has 10 computers you could attack, and for things like threshold signatures, if they steal one secret, then they have everybody's secret. But in general, this is all manageable, and we need to see in the end the latency we have if it's worthwhile implementing. But this is a way how we can get past the light speed limits that we otherwise have. Now the next thing, still only 2 people fled and wanted to get a flight. How do we manage the stakes and the votes? So there's big discussion in a lot of chains too. So we have the normal staking model, but that's already getting a little bit boring, that everybody just gets proportional to the money they put in. And yeah, we had this annoying possibility result that even with staking, we may get into trouble with real world distributions. Like Ethereum gets down to 100 people that are critical out of hundreds of thousands of users. And we have other factors like how many implementations do I actually have. So yeah, it's great that I have all my stakes and everything, but if everybody uses the same code, I still have a single point of failure. The Bitcoin problem, everybody is sitting in the same country because that's where energy is cheap. The same library. So in the end, the staking model is still allowing for way too much influence. So the idea, and that's also an idea that's relatively old but hasn't been implemented yet, if we have these thresholds in a protocol, we look at what they actually mean, and can we then add more flexibility how to build our stakes that go beyond just you have 100 shares, therefore you got a corresponding vote. So if you look at protocols, you usually have terms like this, like wait for t+1 messages, where t is the number of traitors. What I really mean is wait until I'm reasonably sure that at least one guy I'm talking to is honest. And almost every protocol has exactly only these three thresholds. So one is one of the guys is honest, the second one is I have an honest majority, and n-t is I can't wait any longer because now everybody I haven't heard of might be corrupt and not talking to me. And if you replace those three by what the actual property is you're looking for, then you can actually define sets. And this is a beautiful formula for this that I'll probably spare you. I'll print this on a t-shirt later and show off with great math. So in the most flexible way, I can actually make a list of all coalitions of parties I want to be able to be corrupt together. And then this formula tells me when agreement is still possible. So rather than operating on thresholds, I operate on sets. And then I can define properties like I want a majority of countries and a majority of operating systems rather than a third of the parties. And it turns out it's actually very easy to integrate in protocols because usually we have only this message replaced by t+1, and in the implementation we put this out by an external function that then defines your set. And again, we tried this with a couple of protocols, or the ones I did naturally. Tendermint supports it, Libra, Honeybadger. So for all these protocols, I can just take the thresholds out and put the more generic thing in. Threshold crypto is getting ugly, so if I need threshold signatures, then that's getting very sporty. And the options, so that would be my proposal, but again, we are flexible, so that's actually one of the points where I'd like feedback on what do you want. So what I would propose is rather than saying 2/3 of the stake, 2/3 of the stake in 2/3 of the regions. So if you have the Bitcoin scenario, it doesn't help you to get more stake in China because, yep, you already dominate China, good to be you, but you need 2/3 of all countries, and in those 2/3 of the countries, you need 2/3 of the stake. And this way, we are completely safe from an individual country taking over the chain. We can also weight reasons that we say, well, okay, we shouldn't judge who's more democratic, and it seems to change, but that we say certain countries are weighted down with regard to others because of bad history with blockchains. We can even do this deeper, that we say 2/3 of the stakes of 2/3 of all implementations of 2/3 of the countries, and so on. This can also be used to avoid the Amazon cloud effect that I just factor this in just this way. So that is my proposal. This is actually if somebody wants to get feedback, what you would want in a staking system. Some people are thinking, but nobody thinks. So yeah, you have my email address. So this is one proposal, but we have essentially infinite flexibility on how we can define the stakes as long as that one formula I showed you is still valid. And other factors you want to factor in, so I'd be very curious to hear what people think about that. Well, as I mentioned, threshold cryptography is difficult because that holds actually for everybody who does stake. The threshold cryptography says I have n people, and of them I need n-t signatures to generate a signature. If I start with stakes where somebody has 0.57% of a vote, then these schemes usually collapse. And there's a couple of ways we can handle this. All but actual signing end requests work. For threshold signatures actually sign, this is what our chain does and proves it to the outside world. This is still a slightly unsolved problem. That's open research, what we do in there. And we also can support multiple thresholds, which is nice. So the consensus layer management can be totally differently than the actual voting protocol. So you can say if I want to vote in new members, this is done by a completely different quorum or even completely separate parties than the one running the protocol. Or if I want to reconfigure, that I have different thresholds for reconfiguration than I have for voting or anything else. And yeah, let's not talk about this. So that's actually now my final topic. So you guys can have coffee or beer or whatever you want more after listening to all of this. So that's the game theoretic issues. So greedy validate. So first is managing the validator numbers. So I mentioned we have a number in our head, and that can also be configurable, but we don't want 10,000 hosts, but we also don't want only 4 validators. So one thing is that we can say stakes are rounded down. So if you have less than 0.1 stake, you round it to 0, you have no vote. Unless you delegate, that guy you delegate to is then adding up and is not rounded down. We can also say if you're below a certain threshold, you just ignore your stake unless you delegate. So if you have too little stake, you're not part of the, you're not a validator. On the other hand, we also want to make sure that no validator gets too big. So there we can do the opposite. Up to 5% stake, you get more money for doing your validator job. But if you have more than 5%, you still get as much money as if you had 5%. So there's no commercial value in becoming the big whale monopoly like the Bitcoin miners with 20%. They still get as much money as if they had 5%. So they would do a lot of work for nothing. So this way we can actually set our thresholds to relatively precisely how many parties we want. And if they're good economists, we will get the number. While the greedy validators, so if we allow people to reconfigure the protocol, a greedy validator may say, well, why don't we put all of this up to 10% or 20% and then kick out all the small guys. So the idea here is once we have a running blockchain, I can have any arbitrary set of people vote. So we can have, let's call the validators executive. So we can have a congress which is totally separate. Say the most active traders form the congress, and votes that affect how the executive works are done by Congress, or impeachment of a corrupt leader is done by Congress. And for completeness, Vega would then be the judicative because code is law and we still provide the code. So this way, the people, we can make sure we have several people that do voting and everybody votes on something where they don't have a stake and make money off if they manipulate the vote. So that should handle greedy validators halfway. The lazy validator, if we monitor how much progress somebody makes, so if you look in the protocols, we do see this guy's message always came so late that nobody actually acted on them anymore. We can average the last 100 messages. How much did you actually contribute to push the protocol forward? If you didn't, you don't get any money. So your business case is again better if you say, rather than running on a Pi 0, I delegate all my stake to some bigger guy who then at least gives me a share. Not completely bulletproof. This means people could gang up and lie about, I think he never did something, and try to get his money, but it's much better than allowing lazy people in. And that was actually my last slide.